and the complete eradication of the Jews a goal worth spending Gestapo resources on. It was a belief fully shared by Hitler.
One's got to remember that to Hitler and to the Nazis, to Himmler, that the Jews were another enemy. In fact, they were the enemy of all enemies. They were the enemy behind the enemy powers.
Nazi propaganda made this quite clear, depicted everywhere. The figure of a stereotyped, demonized, eternal Jew supporting both the Soviet Union and the United States in the form of international capital. He carries a whip with which he beats down the Germans. It is an obscene reversal of the truth. But this was the basic lie on which the Third Reich was built.
And so to them, it was vital that the process of the final solution, the extermination of the Jews, took precedence really over even military operations. And this happens time and time again, where trains bringing reinforcements to the Eastern Front are diverted, kept in sidings and that, whilst trains run to the death camps.
But Müller's zeal was destined to go unrewarded, for the war was soon to require the Gestapo's undivided attention. In 1944, the propaganda machine was cranked up a gear. Without greater home support, victory would be impossible.
Die Zahl unserer Soldaten ist dauernd größer geworden. Sie müssen in Anbetracht ihres harten Einsatzes besonders gut und ausreichend verpflegt werden. Auch die Zuteilung von zusätzlichen Lebensmitteln an Schwer- und Schwerstarbeiter sowie an Lang- und Nachtarbeiter der kriegswichtigen Industrien steigert den Nahrungsmittelbedarf.
German civilians at home were asked to do more to help.
Die Einschränkungen, die die Heimat jetzt auf sich nehmen muss, sind natürlich empfindlich, aber sie stehen in keinem Verhältnis zu den Opfern, die jeder Soldat an der Front täglich zu bringen hat.
But it wasn't that easy. With the population increasingly disenchanted with the Nazi regime, words were not enough anymore. The Gestapo began by tackling all those who did not obviously conform to the Nazi archetype, and those not fully signed up to the Nazi people's community. Anyone who appeared to reject the Teutonic ideal was suspect, and anyone who imitated the lifestyle of the enemy became a Gestapo target for treason.
Und wir haben dann eben nach diesen Vorbildern in den Zeitungen.
We had other models. We had these pictures in the papers that the Nazis themselves put out. And we took them as models, and we tried to look like them, with longer jackets and longer hair. That was our attitude. And of course it was really a thorn in the side for the Nazis. It was obvious that we didn't belong. We were trying to distance ourselves from them.
Dass wir irgendwie nicht dazugehören, dass wir uns distanzierten.
We were mad about jazz, and we danced swing. We were passionate about dancing. Later they called us the Swing Kids.
Das hat man uns später angedichtet, ne?
The propaganda machine went into overdrive, viciously denigrating Americans, blacks in particular.
Swing ist Trumpf. Wir befinden uns nicht etwa in Afrika, sondern in New York. Auf dieser Tanzkonkurrenz der Nigger werden Urwalderinnerungen als neueste Errungenschaften amerikanischer Zivilisation aufgefrischt. Und weiße Menschen legen anscheinend Wert darauf, die Nigger noch zu übertrumpfen. Das hier sind Teilnehmer einer Swing-Dauertanzkonkurrenz.
The German swing kids were just lads wanting to rebel. Swing was cosmopolitan and relaxed, everything that the Nazis rejected. But they were accused of undermining their country and of betraying the brave soldiers at the front.
It was put down in interrogation transcripts. What the youth was doing was a threat to the state. Building cliques outside of the Hitler Youth, it threatened the state and national morale, put state security in danger, and so on.
The Gestapo caught the swing kids in its net.
Two figures stood there with hats and long coats and with a car, and we drove to the station. They got going there. They started beating me already, and then later at the interrogation in the basement, where we were locked up and interrogated, we were kicked down the stairs. They got angrier and angrier. They wanted to hear something specific that they'd set out already, probably written it all down already, to report to Berlin their heroic action, what they've found out amongst the youth, and how subversive they were, and criminals too. I couldn't give them that pleasure though, and the more they beat me, the more frightened I became, because I thought, there must be something terrible behind this, if people behave like this.
Da muss was fürchterliches dahinter stecken, wenn sich Menschen so verhalten, ne?
It was the same story all across Germany.
I was locked up overnight in the basement of the Gestapo building and stayed there 20 days. Then I was released. There was no official charge or anything on the part of the Gestapo. I was simply locked up.
The Gestapo could imprison and torture with complete impunity.
Every single one of these people was a state employee, was covered by state permission, and was capable of murder, without having to justify themselves afterwards as to why they'd shot someone. There were no limits at all. They were all potentially cold-hearted murderers.
Although support among ordinary Germans was not what it once was, the Gestapo organization still relied heavily on informers. The card indexes that were so religiously kept in each of its offices contain all the denunciations and records of what actions followed. Any German citizen, even the racially spotless, could now fall victim to the Gestapo. Annemarie S. was denounced as a prostitute. She was taken to the Gestapo HQ in Cologne, the Elder House, on the 7th of November 1942. Held without charge for 2 weeks, she was then released under a curfew, under which she had to be home every night before midnight. For 2 years, Annemarie obeyed the restriction. Then, one night, she arrived home 15 minutes late. Denounced by a neighbor, the defenseless woman was arrested and deported to Ravensbrück concentration camp. 2 months later, she was dead. But these routine persecutions disguised the fact that the Gestapo was not reaching the core of real and growing German dissent. And soon it would have to confront a challenge that would prove all but overwhelming. The Nazis' bid to conquer Europe had seen all its able-bodied men drafted into the German armed forces. On the home front, the shortage of labor was severe. Vital industries, even the munitions factories, were in disarray. The Allies solved this problem by putting women workers into farms and factories. Nazi ideology, that decreed that a woman's place was in the home, prevented that happening in Germany. By 1944, Allied bombing had rendered the labor shortage even more acute. A solution had to be found urgently.
Für unsere Rüstungsindustrie und unsere Landwirtschaft wurden ferner als Ersatz für die zur Wehrmacht eingerückten Männer rund 2,5 Millionen ausländische Arbeitskräfte herangezogen, die jetzt ebenfalls von uns ernährt werden müssen.
Initially, the workers were voluntary recruits, but there were too few volunteers to keep the massive German military machine running for long. So the authorities turned to forced labor and began to import workers from the German-occupied countries. In the end, almost 7 million of them. The Gestapo was entrusted with the task of choosing candidates for this involuntary journey. It was one of the biggest enforced migrations that had ever occurred in world history. Elena